40% of all crime in the UK is cybercrime and fraud. That is a huge amount of crime, particularly when the prosecution rate is under 1%. And I'd imagine the amount of resources in law enforcement isn't even at 1% to try and combat this. This is a huge problem in the UK.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to Times Radio's Tech Report. Today I'm joined by Jake Moore, Global Security Advisor for ESET. Thank you for joining me on the Tech Report today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
So the National Cybersecurity Centre has revealed that there's been a record number of nationally significant cyber attacks. They listed at 204, which are handled by GCHQ's Security Centre in the year up to September. Now, this is up from 89 in the previous 12 months. And they say that these cyber threats facing UK, they continue to escalate. Could you tell me what these attacks involved?
Yeah, so we have seen a huge uptick in particularly high-profile attacks. So we've all heard of the Marks and Spencers, the Jaguar Land Rover, and so on. And they are getting the headlines. In fact, that's potentially what these groups are after. It's showing that there's a bit of unpredictability, in fact, behind these groups. They're not just after the money. And that's what's throwing a lot of these companies off. We're so used to ransomware, and we've been seeing and dealing with ransomware attacks for many years. And then we've got this extortion of data being threatened and forcing companies to pay up. But when we're seeing these groups of attackers who are clearly just doing it for bragging rights, kudos, and enjoying it in a way, it's really making companies having to think even more about their security. And with the greater dependency on, say, digital infrastructure, it is becoming harder. We're all hearing about things like cyber insurance, but a lot of companies are still left scratching their heads trying to work out if they are actually insurable. And if you look at Jaguar Land Rover themselves, they were saying they were only 2 weeks away from having their cyber insurance all set up. And that's a massive company to not have the right insurance. So this is a big issue. Big high profile attacks are occurring. And if anything's to learn from it, we have to have this big wake up call and improve that security and prevention.
And as you mentioned, we've seen M&S, also Jaguar Land Rover, those companies impacted by these cyber threats and cyber attacks. I mean, is it just, big British businesses that are being impacted by this, or are there other sectors that are being impacted by this?
No, so all sectors are hit all the time. We tend not to hear about the small and medium-sized businesses because of the numbers that go with it. They're not necessarily into the millions. They're not necessarily into the many, many months of trying to get back on track. And they don't always affect so many people. So as this is roughly the bread and butter of a lot of, say, financially motivated criminals, it's not the ones garnering all of those headlines. Because if you look at the numbers of M&S, £300 million potentially there. If we're looking at the first ever government-backed loan to try and recoup the losses of Jaguar Land Rover at around £1.5 billion, that is the first loan we've ever seen at this scale due to a direct cyber attack. So it's very, very interesting to see, particularly the retail industry, hit so much. In fact, just this week, we've been seeing Mango also attacked. We don't know yet if they are connected to the same ones, but yet every industry is being attacked. And we have to learn from that. It's not just these ones that we've heard of. Every industry is being attacked and are going to be attacked in the future as well.
And it's interesting because the National Cybersecurity Centre, they said that a substantial proportion of these incidents were linked to advanced persistent threat actors. I mean, what does that mean? Who are the people that are behind these sort of attacks?
Well, the advanced bit really comes down to the sophistication of what they are using. So that might be more powerful tools that necessarily aren't just social engineering. They're using sometimes this ransomware as a service, but it's very sophisticated. It's nothing that can be spotted straight away and captured. It has to go a little bit further. So lots of these attackers will sit in the system of a network for many months, in fact, to see when they're updated, to work out really when to attack. And some will spend up to a year, particularly nation state attackers, will sit inside a network and just monitor it. May not do anything else other than just report back to their the people in the head unit who are monitoring it, and they just learn everything about them. But the persistent part of the APT, that's how relentless they really are. And my goodness, they will just continually target, whether that's everyone on the LinkedIn page, or if that's everyone they can get a hold of their phone number, or if it's just targeting the network itself, checking out how secure their endpoint protection is, how good their firewall really is at protecting, or they may even go from inside as well. So we've got this insider threat that APTs tend to also like to go, just to put the final ribbon on top of the parcel, to actually go full pelt on trying to particularly get a company that they really are targeting. So if there's any APTs that are targeting a company, unfortunately, it is a case of when, not if.
If we take the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack case, it's suspected that Russia might have been behind this. Do we have a scale of which Russia is playing a role in cyber attacks in the UK?
It is still really difficult to attribute where they come from. Well, we know that the Scattered Spider group tend to have English speaking people amongst them. So we're talking from the UK and the US, but they're using malware, so this ransomware that is generated from a different company or a different criminal company altogether. So they all try and work in these separate ways when they come together to then go and target. But we do know that, yeah, there are Russian influences. We've particularly got a Chinese spying influence as well on our radar in different guises. And so it can become quite muddy to target who we think it might be. And sometimes the code can be written in different languages to try and throw us on a red herring. So it's not always the best way. But what I see that we might not be able to attribute who's actually behind it. This is actually about prevention, protect next time. Okay, they may have been able to get through, but we need to learn from that each time. I know we talk about wake-up calls a lot, but so many of these big attacks really should be the final wake-up calls for so many businesses out there.
I mean, why do you think that we are seeing this rise in cyber attacks? And also, do you think that improvements in detecting these cyber attacks is also contributing to the rise of cases that we're aware of?
Yeah, I think this is a good question to really raise. Like, why is this happening? I think we are seeing a rise, but they are high profile. So they might be indirectly targeted themselves because they might have an account with that high profile retailer like M&S, for example, and that then hits those individuals on the street. But then we've got this big supply chain problem, and that's where we see so many more people hit in an attack. So if we take Jaguar Land Rover, and I feel very sorry for them because they were the ones targeted in such scale here. On the 1st of September of the year, they then looked at the next 4 to 6 weeks without actually working. But it wasn't just them, it was everyone that's connected to them, from your local mechanic down the road, right the way through this supply chain. And that's where we're seeing so many people impacted by this. It isn't just the retail sector, but that digital infrastructure, we rely on it more and more. And therefore, bigger things can go wrong. We've also got scale that AI is helping at. It's not this wonderful, simple press of a button to turn it into AI. It just means they can automate a bit more. It means they can scale up and test different industries. And it seems like they've got onto a good one here. They got into a few retailers at the start of the year. They tested it out potentially a couple of years ago on a casino in Las Vegas. And now they're able to test that out on so many companies that haven't got round to updating where they should have. And these groups are effectively just having a bit of fun, unfortunately, and running amok amongst each industry.
I mean, can we gauge a scale of how many businesses you think aren't prepared for these sort of cyber attacks?
I think it's difficult to put a number on how many companies aren't prepared for these types of attacks, but I would look at cyber insurance. And as we're nowhere near a half of all companies yet to have cyber insurance, I would say that half are not prepared, because to get that insurance, you need to prove that you would be able to mitigate at best some sort of large scale attack, at the very least, to be able to have your data backed up offline. So if it gets compromised, you can get back up and running pretty swiftly. But like we saw with Jaguar Land Rover, they weren't able to prove that they could do all those things and reduce the amount of time they update all their endpoints, and then they can't get that bespoke insurance. That's kind of a gauge to see that where we are right now. But no one's unhackable. It proves that so many companies will have some sort of vulnerability in there, whether that be the human or whether that be a vulnerability that's not been patched yet, they're not updating, for example. We're all susceptible to these attacks, and especially the key part, the persistent part of these threats, they're just going to continue until they get in.
Is it just the UK that's facing this, or are we seeing a broader global trend for this?
It's difficult to always get stats that marry up amongst how they've been put together. But yeah, we're definitely seeing, we're bound to be seeing an uptick in cyber attacks all over the world. Each year we create more criminal groups who want to give it a go. If you think young people wanting to test out their skills, they start with their schools and then they move on to the small and medium-sized businesses in their area, and then they might get a taste for success. And if it's not just about the kudos, they can actually fund their habit and their skill set by extorting these companies who, unfortunately, some will pay. And so we're seeing that all over the world anyway. To put figures on it and to put an actual number on how much it's costing is going to be pretty difficult. But all we can say is it's definitely on the up.
I guess in terms of state level power, I mean, what influence does the British state have on trying to prevent cyber attacks from abroad, for example?
Very little, really. I think the government are struggling with cybercrime and fraud as a whole. So if we look at government statistics, says that 40% of all crime in the UK is cybercrime and fraud. That is a huge amount of crime, particularly when the prosecution rate is under 1%. And I'd imagine the amount of resources in law enforcement isn't even at 1% to try and combat this. This is a huge problem in the UK. And so rather than looking at who's doing it, they do still need to help with the prevention side of things, which they have been trying to give. Now, the NCSC gave out its annual review only this week, trying to help businesses really understand this threat. One of the takeaways that they were offering was to put all of their backups and resilience policies on pen and paper, which immediately sounds crazy to think of. But of course, it's something to have should all the systems go down and there be no laptop with anything working on it to work out what to do. So that pen and paper, well, it can come into its own should you then start to work out what your procedure should start with. But it's very difficult to attribute. The government know they're not going to be able to find who's behind them. The charging rate, the prosecution rate is so low, it's effectively forget that bit. Let's think about protection and offer what we can. And that annual review is something that they at least offer some. But if we're talking small businesses, I think they should be starting with the cyber essentials and looking into insurance. When it goes further up the scale, then we need to start talking to bespoke agencies that can hone in on really teaching those companies how to protect themselves.
Jake Moore, thank you so much for joining me on the Tech Report today.
Thank you.